Hill House had a way of watching you. It stood on its own, a brooding collection of angles and shadows against a lonely sky, and for 80 years it had gathered stories the way an old coat gathers dust. Its walls were sound, its doors shut as sensibly as any you'd find, and a deep silence lay steadily against the wood and stone, but something in its spirit was wrong. It was a place that had held its breath for too long, waiting. People who tried to live there didn't stay. They left in a hurry or in a coffin, or they simply vanished from its memory, leaving behind nothing but a half-told rumor. Into this waiting silence came Dr. John Montague, a man whose gentle, scholarly demeanor seemed ill-suited for a place so stubbornly grim. He was an investigator of the paranormal, but he carried no ghost-hunting gadgets or dramatic airs. He simply wanted to observe, to listen, and to document whatever truth the house might be willing to tell. He rented it for the summer, hoping to catch a glimpse of the uncanny in its natural habitat. To join his vigil, he sought out not thrill-seekers, but those who had, at some point in their lives, been touched by something they couldn't explain. He sent out his quiet invitations, and a few souls answered the call. First came Eleanor Vance. At 32, she felt much older, a creature of quiet corners and muted wishes. For 11 years, she had been the sole caretaker for her demanding, invalid mother, a life that had shrunk her world down to the four walls of a sick room. Her only claim to the unusual was a childhood memory, a shower of stones that had rained down on her family's house for days, an event for which everyone secretly, silently blamed her. Now, with her mother gone, Eleanor was adrift, a ship without a harbor, and the invitation to Hill House felt less like an experiment and more like a lifeline. She packed her small bag with a fierce, secret hope. Perhaps this was where she might finally find a place to belong, Next was Theodora, who arrived in a cloud of color and confidence. Witty, bohemian, and utterly self-assured, Theo, as she insisted on being called, was everything Eleanor was not. She had a rumored sensitivity, an intuitive grace that made her feel at home in the world. She saw Hill House not as a threat, but as an adventure, another curiosity to be explored with a sharp remark and a fearless smile. And then there was Luke Sanderson, the charming, slightly aimless heir to the Hill House fortune. His family, tired of his gambling debts and lack of direction, had sent him along as their reluctant chaperone. He was handsome, quick with a joke, and carried the easy confidence of a man who had never truly had to work for anything. He was there to make sure the doctor didn't burn the place down, but he seemed far more interested in flirting with Theo and enjoying the summer away from his responsibilities. They were met at the door by Mrs. Dudley, the caretaker, a woman who seemed as fixed and unmoving as the house itself. Her face was a stony mask of disapproval, and she spoke in a flat, rhythmic monotone, reciting the rules that governed their stay. "I set dinner on the dining room sideboard at 6, she announced, not looking at any of them. "I clear up in the morning. I don't wait on people. I don't stay after dark. No one will come any nearer than the town, so there won't be anyone to hear you if you scream in the night." She repeated this last part without a hint of irony, and then she was gone, leaving them to the house's unsettling welcome. From the very first hour, it began its work. The rooms felt off, the angles not quite true. Corridors seemed to curve when you weren't looking, and doors left ajar would swing slowly, silently shut, not with a draft, but with the steady, deliberate push of an unseen hand. In the heart of the house stood a tall, cold tower, and within it a library filled with rotting books and a palpable dread. Eleanor took one step inside and recoiled, a wave of visceral fear washing over her. She couldn't explain it, but she knew with absolute certainty that she must never enter that room again. Despite the house's strange welcome, the first few days settled into a surprisingly companionable routine. Dr. Montague spent his hours in the parlor, poring over old ledgers and cataloguing the house's long history of tragedy. Luke mixed drinks and told stories, his lazy charm a welcome distraction. Theo, with her sharp wit, would gently tease Eleanor, coaxing her out of her shell, and for the first time in years, Eleanor felt the warmth of a fledgling friendship. She found herself laughing, sharing small confidences, and feeling a part of something, a member of this strange, temporary family. But the house was always there, pressing in at the edges of their laughter. They discovered a spot in the upstairs hallway, a patch of air that was bone-deep cold. A sudden, shocking chill that felt like passing through a wall of ice. It was a warning, a prelude. That night, the house truly woke up. It began as a faint vibration, a deep thrumming that seemed to rise from the very foundations of the house. Then came the pounding. It was a sound too immense to be real, a tremendous hollow booming that walked the corridors like a giant, its footsteps shaking the floorboards. It moved with a slow, deliberate purpose, coming closer and closer until it stopped right outside their parlor door. The four of them sat frozen, their faces pale in the lamplight. The doorknob began to turn, slowly, then more violently, rattling in its socket as if something impossibly strong were trying to force its way in. Theo grabbed Eleanor's hand, her knuckles white. Luke, for once, had no joke to offer. They huddled together, listening, as the great invisible thing prowled the halls, testing their doors, letting them know they were not alone. The house, it seemed, preferred an audience for its games. And its focus was already beginning to narrow. A few mornings later they found it. Scrawled across the floral wallpaper of the hallway in what looked like chalk were two shaky, childlike words. "Help Eleanor." Eleanor stared at it, her blood running cold. It felt like a violation, a cruel finger pointing her out from the crowd. Why her? The message was an accusation, a public shaming. She felt a hot blush of humiliation creep up her neck. She wanted to shrink, to disappear into the very walls that had betrayed her. Theo, seeing her distress, wrapped a protective arm around her. "It's just the house being nasty," she whispered, her voice fierce. "It's not you, Nell. It's this horrible place." But the house was not finished. The next day the message reappeared, this time more insistent, more personal. It was smeared above Theo's bed in a thick red substance that dripped onto her pillow and filled the room with a sickeningly sweet, foul smell. "Help Eleanor come home, Eleanor," it read. The same vile liquid had been poured over all of Theo's clothes, ruining her vibrant silks and linens, staining them with its dark, ugly mark. The house had made Theo's room unlivable, forcing her to move her things into Eleanor's. The act was both an attack on Theo and a possessive claim on Eleanor, pushing them together, increasing Eleanor's sense of dependence, of intimacy, of utter exposure. In between these episodes of terror, there were moments of strange, bright calm that only made the unease more profound. One sunny afternoon, Eleanor and Theo wandered down to a cheerful little brook at the edge of the property. They lay in the grass, laughing and talking about picnics and fairy tale princes, the warmth of the sun a comforting balm. For a few hours, they were just two young women enjoying a summer day, and the brooding mansion on the hill seemed a world away. But even there, in the dappled sunlight, the feeling of being watched never quite left them. Back inside, the house continued its subtle mischief. Distances would shift. A hallway that had seemed short in the morning would feel endless by night. Doors never seemed to stay where you left them. It was a place built to disorient, to unmoor you from your own senses. Then came the night that changed everything for Eleanor. She lay in her bed, the darkness of her room absolute, a thick, suffocating blanket. From the hallway, she heard a sound that chilled her to the bone, the thin, terrified sobbing of a child. It was a sound of pure misery, lost and alone. Eleanor's heart ached with a mixture of pity and terror. The crying seemed to be coming closer, just outside her door. She reached out in the darkness, her hand trembling, seeking the comfort of Theo's presence in the other bed. Her fingers brushed against another hand, and she clutched it tightly, a wave of relief washing over her. She wasn't alone. She held the hand for what felt like an eternity, listening to the child's weeping fade away, her own fear slowly subsiding in the shared silent comfort. Finally, the darkness began to thin, and the first grey light of dawn crept into the room. She turned her head, a grateful smile on her lips, to look at Theo. But Theo was clear across the room, sound asleep in her own bed. Eleanor snatched her hand back as if she'd been burned. She stared at her empty palm, her breath catching in her throat. The hand she had been holding was not Theo's. It had been strong and firm and very, very cold. "Whose hand was I holding?" she whispered to the empty room, and in that moment her fear blossomed into a private, incommunicable knowledge. The haunting was no longer just noises in the hall or words on the wall. The house could touch you. The arrival of Mrs. Montague, the doctor's wife, shattered their fragile camaraderie. She was a brash, booming woman, accompanied by her equally self-assured friend, Arthur. Convinced of her own superior methods, she dismissed her husband's careful observations as amateurish. She brought with her a planchette, a heart-shaped board on wheels, a precursor to the Ouija board, and immediately set about conducting a séance. The session was a theatrical mess of jerky movements and fragmented, emphatic messages. The planchette scribbled nonsense about nuns, guilt, and cryptic warnings to go home. But through the muddle, one word appeared again and again, scrawled with an insistent, almost violent energy. Nell. 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 It was a cheap, dramatic performance, yet it echoed the same chilling message the house had already written on its walls. Eleanor was the one it wanted. As the days wore on, Eleanor began to change. The constant attention from the house, which had once terrified her, now felt like a strange sort of embrace. She was no longer just a guest, she was a participant. The shifting patterns on the wallpaper seemed to form words only she could read. The distant sound of laughter in an empty room felt like a shared secret. The house was speaking to her in its own twisted, possessive language, and she was beginning to understand. A strange, euphoric feeling began to bubble up inside her. I am learning the pathways of the heart, she thought, walking the crooked halls. She felt herself expanding, her identity merging with the old, dark house. The others saw the change, and it frightened them. Theo, who swung between sharp-tongued concern and genuine warmth, tried to reach her, but Eleanor was drifting away, lost in her private communion. Luke watched her with a kind but baffled pity. Dr. Montague, alarmed by the growing specificity of the phenomena, finally came to a decision. The house was feeding on Eleanor's vulnerability, and the experiment had become too dangerous. For her own safety, she had to leave. When he told her, the words landed like a physical blow. To Eleanor, it felt like the ultimate betrayal. This strange, haunted place had become the only family she had known in years, and now they were casting her out, just as her own sister had, just as the world always had. But I can't leave, she pleaded, her voice trembling. Where would I go? Then, in a disquieting shift, her desperation hardened into a strange, fierce resolve. She looked around the parlor, at the dark wood and the watching windows, and a revelation bloomed in her mind. Hill House wasn't just a place she was visiting. It was home. It was the first place that had ever truly noticed her, the first place that had ever called her by name, that had written her into its very walls. They couldn't make her leave. But the decision was made. Luke would drive her to the station in the morning. That night, while the others were occupied, Eleanor slipped away. She found the car keys on a hook by the door, her movements quiet and sure. She walked out into the cool, dark air, the house looming behind her like a silent accomplice. She got into the driver's seat and started the engine. As she drove down the long, looping approach road, her thoughts were a wild, braided monologue of defiance, joy, and utter surrender. She remembered the long, grey years with her mother, the constant demands, the crushing loneliness. She thought of the others, sleeping in the house, trying to send her away from the only place that had ever wanted her. They can't shut me out, she thought, a fierce, triumphant joy rising in her chest. The house wants me. I'm coming home. She pressed her foot down on the accelerator, the car picking up speed as it rounded a sharp curve. Ahead, illuminated in the headlights, stood a great ancient oak tree, its branches like gnarled arms reaching for her. She saw it not as an obstacle, but as an embrace. With a small, serene smile, she turned the steering wheel. The crash was the final, terrible punctuation mark at the end of her story. The others, woken by the sound, found her in the wreckage, her journey finally over. They left Hill House the next day, a quiet, stunned dispersal. There was no triumphant revelation, no final confrontation with the darkness. There was only the heavy weight of their failure. Dr. Montague later wrote up his findings in a preliminary report, a document the scientific world politely ignored. Luke went back to his life of charming aimlessness, Theo to her bohemian world, both of them forever marked by the summer they had spent in that wrong, hungry place. And Hill House remained. It stood as it had for 80 years and might stand for 80 more, its walls sound, its doors sensibly shut, its silence lying steadily against the wood and stone. It watched and it waited, holding its darkness within, forever the only place someone like Eleanor might finally, truly call home.